The air in Mr. Hammond's office was heavy with perfume and old money. Mahogany shelves, lined with leather-bound law books, framed the long conference table, and at its center, a silver tray gleamed under the overhead light, one last symbol of my grandfather's taste for control. The room was full of family, but it didn't feel like family. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace like she was attending a gala instead of a will reading. My brother Victor whispered stock numbers into his phone, pretending not to care, though the twitch of his jaw gave him away. And I sat at the far end, clutching the same purse I'd carried since college, feeling every inch the outsider. When the lawyer began reading, his voice was calm, deliberate, rehearsed. To my son Howard West, I leave my controlling shares of West Maritime Group, including all assets, vessels, and holdings. My father's face lit up, his jaw setting in that familiar mix of satisfaction and triumph. To my daughter-in-law, Evelyn West, Mr. Hammond continued, I bequeath the family estate in Napa Valley and its adjoining vineyard. Mother gave a small, polite laugh, covering her mouth like it was inappropriate to celebrate in front of the bereaved. Victor shifted impatiently until his name appeared. To my grandson Victor West, I leave my collection of classic automobiles in the Manhattan penthouse. He exhaled sharply, a smirk tugging at his mouth. Then the room fell silent. Miss Hammond cleared his throat again. And to my granddaughter Clara West. He paused longer than necessary, glancing at me before continuing. I leave this envelope. The words hung in the air like gunfire. Someone coughed to hide a laugh. The envelope sat on the polished table, small, unassuming, sealed with a wax crest in faded red. My mother tilted her head, her smile cutting through the tension like a knife. Guess Grandpa didn't love you that much after all, she said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. Victor chuckled. Even the lawyer looked uncomfortable. I reached out slowly, took the envelope, and forced myself to breathe. The paper was smooth and thick beneath my fingers, too deliberate to be meaningless. I'm sure there's something thoughtful inside, my mother added, patting my hand. Maybe a note or a keepsake. You were always sentimental. Their laughter came soft but sharp, the kind that slides under your skin and stays there. My chest tightened, but I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. For years I'd been the quiet one, the helper, the reliable daughter who never caused trouble. The one who held cameras at Christmas while everyone else posed in front of the tree. The one who listened when they argued, comforted when they fell apart, and got forgotten when things were good. Now, I was the punchline at my grandfather's funeral. Mr. Hammond cleared his throat again, perhaps to cut through the awkwardness. There are no further directives, Mrs. West. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that stayed perfectly dry. How touching, she murmured. He always had a flair for drama. The meeting ended with the sound of chairs scraping and expensive shoes on marble. No one looked at me as they left. They didn't need to. Their laughter lingered like smoke. I waited until the room was empty, until the last echo of my family's voices disappeared down the hall before I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket. Outside, Seattle's afternoon sky was low and gray, the kind of color that seeps into your bones. I stood under the awning while the wind whipped hair across my face. Through the office windows, I could still see them. Mother checking her reflection in the glass. Victor showing Dad something on his phone, all of them smiling, free of guilt. I wondered if Grandpa had watched them the same way, silent and disappointed. The envelope burned in my pocket. I could feel the raised seal through the fabric, almost pulsing with some quiet urgency. Part of me wanted to throw it into the nearest trash can, to erase the humiliation before it carved itself deeper. But another part, the small, defiant voice that had survived years of being overlooked, whispered, "Not yet." When I reached my car, I sat in the driver's seat, without starting the engine. Rain began to patter on the windshield, a soft, steady rhythm. I pulled the envelope out, turned it over in my hands. My name was written in his handwriting, neat, elegant, precise. Beneath it, a single word, confidential. My throat tightened. I broke the seal with a quiet snap. Inside was one sheet of ivory stationery and a glossy plane ticket. The letter read, Miss Clara West, You are requested to appear in person at Rosenberg Trust, Geneva, Switzerland for verification of inheritance. Date April 18th. Time 10:00 amperes. M. Local. Please bring this document and proof of identity. Below the signature in my grandfather's handwriting were 4 words: Trust the game, Clara. My fingers trembled. Geneva, Switzerland. A trust my mind spun. Grandpa had spent his whole life in Seattle. He'd never even mentioned Switzerland. If this was a joke, it was a cruel one. But I knew his handwriting. I could still see it in every birthday card, every note he left on my old chessboard. I read the note again, tracing the ink with my thumb. Trust the game. He'd said that countless times when we played chess on the porch during summers. He always claimed life was just a bigger board, that the trick wasn't to win quickly, but to make sure your last move mattered. Maybe this was his final move. I started the car, the windshield wipers beating against the rain. Through the blur of gray and city lights, I saw a reflection of myself. Wet hair, red eyes, but a glimmer of something new behind them. Not sadness, not humiliation, curiosity. That evening my mother called. Just checking on you, she said, in that sugary tone she used when pretending to care. Don't be upset about today. Your grandfather was old-fashioned. Maybe he thought you'd appreciate something symbolic. Like a plane ticket, I asked. She laughed lightly. A trip might do you good. Switzerland's lovely this time of year. Maybe you'll even find a nice teacher's retreat there. I didn't answer. I could hear Victor's voice in the background bragging about the cars he'd inherited. Dad's laughter followed. The same sound I'd grown up chasing, trying to earn and always missing. When I hung up, I stood by my apartment window watching rain slide down the glass. The envelope lay open on the table beside me, the ticket glinting under the lamp. The departure date was in 4 days. 4 days to decide whether I wanted to chase a dead man's riddle or stay here and keep being their afterthought. I remembered Grandpa's voice again, soft but sharp. The queen is only powerful when she moves. I packed a suitcase before I could talk myself out of it. That night, while the city slept, I tucked the envelope into my passport and whispered, "All right, Grandpa, let's play your game." Bạn đã nói, viết chương 2 khoảng 800, 1400, 2000 dar co. Không phân tích, không giới thiệu, bắt đầu ngay bằng câu đầu tiên. Chỉ xuống dòng giữa các đoạn, không dùng gạch kẻ hết dòng. ChatGPT đã nói. The rain didn't stop for 2 days, a gray curtain that made the world outside my apartment feel suspended in time. I spent those 48 hours pacing between the window and my suitcase, reading and rereading the letter until the edges softened under my fingers. Each time I looked at the words verification of inheritance, my pulse quickened. Was it possible Grandpa had hidden something the others didn't know? Or was this all some elaborate way of giving me closure, a final puzzle to solve before I let him go? By the 3rd morning, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I sat at my small kitchen table, laptop open, typing Rosenberg Trust Geneva into the search bar. The results were intimidating. Private banking, family offices, confidential wealth management for high net worth clients. Everything about it screamed money and secrecy. I scrolled through pages of press releases, mergers, and board member names until my eyes blurred. It was real. That much I knew. But what did it have to do with me, a woman whose biggest asset was a 7-year-old Honda Civic? When my mother called that afternoon, I let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through crisp and cold. "Sweetheart, if this is about that silly ticket, please don't embarrass yourself. Those people deal with fortunes, not feelings. Just shred the letter and move on. Move on." The same phrase she'd used when Grandpa died. When I didn't get into law school. When Victor crashed my car and blamed me for parking it wrong. Move on, as if every disappointment could be swept aside like dust. That evening, I went to my bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser. The smell of cedar and old paper rose up. At the bottom lay the chessboard Grandpa had given me when I was 12. One of the pawns was missing. He'd once said he left it that way on purpose, to remind me that sometimes you play short-handed and still win. I ran my thumb over the worn wooden pieces and realized that every lesson he'd taught me had led to this. He wasn't sentimental, he was strategic. The decision came quietly like a tide rising. By the time the clock hit midnight, I'd booked a flight to Zurich for Friday morning. The next day, I told my principal I needed personal leave. She frowned confused. "You're one of our most reliable teachers, Clara." "Is everything all right? I think I just need to find something out," I said. "Something that's been waiting a long time." Packing was strangely easy. I folded my best dresses, a black coat, a worn paperback copy of Pride and Prejudice, and the letter from Geneva. When I zipped the suitcase, I felt lighter, as though I'd already left behind the weight of everyone else's expectations. Thursday night, Mom invited me to dinner. Against my better judgment, I went. The family dining room was glowing with candlelight when I arrived, just like it had been the day of the will reading. Same silverware, same crystal glasses, same air of superiority. Victor was showing off pictures of the penthouse he'd inherited in Manhattan. "You should see the view, Clara. You'd probably faint," he said with a smirk. "I'm sure it's beautiful," I replied, pouring myself a glass of water. Mom, already on her second martini, smiled too widely. "So any plans this weekend? Maybe a little self-care after all that drama at the lawyer's office." I stared at the bubbles rising in my glass. "Actually, I'm flying to Switzerland tomorrow." The table went quiet for 2 heartbeats. Then Victor laughed. "You're what you heard me." Dad set down his fork, frowning. "You can't be serious." For what purpose? I pulled the folded letter from my purse and placed it in front of him. "For this." He skimmed it, then handed it back like it was toxic. "Clara, these places don't just send random teachers invitations. You're wasting your money. It's already paid for." "First class," I said, letting the words linger. Mom raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "First class? Who's paying for that?" "Apparently Grandpa." Her laugh was short, sharp. "Oh, Clara. Honey, he loved you, but he wasn't some international banker. You're being naive." I looked at her across the table, at her flawless pearls, at the manicured hands that had never once touched a pot or pan, and I felt something shift inside me. "Maybe I am," I said quietly. "But I'd rather be naive and curious than cynical and stuck." For the first time in my life, she didn't have a ready comeback. Dinner continued in tense silence, broken only by Victor's occasional scoff. When dessert arrived, I excused myself. Mom tried one last jab as I reached for my coat. "Switzerland's expensive, you know. Don't come crying to us when your credit card bill shows up." I smiled. "Don't worry, I won't." Outside, the night air was cold enough to sting. I stood by my car for a long moment, looking up at the sky. The clouds had finally parted, and for the first time all week, the moon was visible, sharp and silver, like a coin tossed into darkness. I left for the airport before sunrise. Seattle was still asleep, its streets slick with rain. I parked my car in long-term parking and walked into the terminal, the ticket clutched like a secret in my hand. The gate agent greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning, Miss West. You're in seat 2 amperes. First class as noted." I blinked. "So it's real." "Very real," she said, handing me the boarding pass. As I settled into my seat on the plane, I glanced around at the quiet luxury that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Soft leather seats, champagne on offer, before takeoff attendants who spoke in calm, rehearsed tones. I kept expecting someone to tap me on the shoulder and tell me there'd been a mistake. But no one did. When the plane lifted off, Seattle shrank below the clouds, and for the first time in years, the knot in my chest loosened. I wasn't running away. I was running towards something. Hours later, when the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers had drifted to sleep, I unfolded the letter again. I traced the line where Grandpa's handwriting met the printed text. Trust, the game he'd written. Trust had never been easy for me, not after years of being dismissed, ignored, overlooked. But maybe he'd known that. Maybe this was his way of forcing me to believe in something again. By the time the flight attendant whispered, "We'll be landing in Zurich in 20 minutes," I was wide awake, my heart thudding like it did before the start of every big exam in college. I looked out the window, and the first light of dawn touched the snow-capped Alps, blinding and pure. The wheels touched down with a soft thud, and an unfamiliar calm spread through me. Zurich was quiet, orderly, beautiful. Everything felt intentional, as if the world itself had paused for this moment. Inside the terminal, the air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh bread. I followed the crowd through customs, still unsure what I was doing, until I saw him. A tall man in a dark suit stood near the arrivals gate, holding a sign with my name in neat black letters, Miss Clara West, Rosenberg Trust. He spotted me immediately, his expression calm but focused. "Miss West?" he asked in lightly accented English. "Yes, I managed." He gave a short, respectful nod. "Welcome to Switzerland. Please come with me. We've been expecting you." The words sent a chill down my spine, not fear, but recognition. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. Someone, somewhere, was waiting for me. As I followed him through the glass doors into the soft winter light, I caught my reflection in the window. The girl who'd left Seattle humiliated wasn't there anymore. What stared back at me was someone I barely recognized, steady, curious, quietly powerful. And for the first time, I believed my grandfather had known exactly what he was doing. The rain didn't stop for 2 days, a gray curtain that made the world outside my apartment feel suspended in time. I spent those 48 hours pacing between the window and my suitcase, reading and rereading the letter until the edges softened under my fingers. Each time I looked at the words "verification of inheritance," my pulse quickened. Was it possible Grandpa had hidden something the others didn't know? Or was this all some elaborate way of giving me closure, a final puzzle to solve before I let him go? By the third morning, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I sat at my small kitchen table, laptop open, typing Rosenberg Trust Geneva into the search bar. The results were intimidating. Private banking, family offices, confidential wealth management for high net worth clients. Everything about it screamed money and secrecy. I scrolled through pages of press releases, mergers, and board member names until my eyes blurred. It was real. That much I knew. But what did it have to do with me, a woman whose biggest asset was a 7-year-old Honda Civic? When my mother called that afternoon, I let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through crisp and cold. "Sweetheart, if this is about that silly ticket, please don't embarrass yourself. Those people deal with fortunes, not feelings. Just shred the letter and move on." Move on. The same phrase she'd used when Grandpa died, when I didn't get into law school, when Victor crashed my car and blamed me for parking it wrong. Move on, as if every disappointment could be swept aside like dust. That evening, I went to my bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser. The smell of cedar and old paper rose up. At the bottom lay the chessboard Grandpa had given me when I was 12. One of the pawns was missing. He'd once said he left it that way on purpose to remind me that sometimes you play short-handed and still win. I ran my thumb over the worn wooden pieces and realized that every lesson he'd taught me had led to this. He wasn't sentimental. He was strategic. The decision came quietly, like a tide rising. By the time the clock hit midnight, I'd booked a flight to Zurich for Friday morning. The next day, I told my principal I needed personal leave. She frowned, confused. "You're one of our most reliable teachers, Clara. Is everything all right? I think I just need to find something out," I said. "Something that's been waiting a long time." Packing was strangely easy. I folded my best dresses, a black coat, a worn paperback copy of Pride and Prejudice, and the letter from Geneva. When I zipped the suitcase, I felt lighter, as though I'd already left behind the weight of everyone else's expectations. Thursday night, Mom invited me to dinner. Against my better judgment, I went. The family dining room was glowing with candlelight. When I arrived, just like it had been the day of the will reading, same silverware, same crystal glasses, same air of superiority. Victor was showing off pictures of the penthouse he'd inherited in Manhattan. "You should see the view, Clara. You'd probably faint," he said with a smirk. "I'm sure it's beautiful," I replied, pouring myself a glass of water. Mom, already on her second martini, smiled too widely. So any plans this weekend? Maybe a little self-care after all that drama at the lawyer's office? I stared at the bubbles rising in my glass. Actually, I'm flying to Switzerland tomorrow. The table went quiet for 2 heartbeats. Then Victor laughed. You're what you heard me. Dad set down his fork, frowning. You can't be serious. For what purpose? I pulled the folded letter from my purse and placed it in front of him. For this. He skimmed it, then handed it back like it was toxic. Clara, these places don't just send random teachers invitations. You're wasting your money. It's already paid for. First class, I said, letting the words linger. Mom raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. First class, who's paying for that? Apparently Grandpa. Her laugh was short, sharp. Oh, Clara. Honey, he loved you, but he wasn't some international banker. You're being naive. I looked at her across the table, at her flawless pearls, at the manicured hands that had never once touched a pot or pan, and I felt something shift inside me. Maybe I am, I said quietly. But I'd rather be naive and curious than cynical and stuck. For the first time in my life, she didn't have a ready comeback. Dinner continued in tense silence, broken only by Victor's occasional scoff. When dessert arrived, I excused myself. Mom tried one last jab as I reached for my coat. Switzerland's expensive, you know. Don't come crying to us when your credit card bill shows up. I smiled. Don't worry, I won't. Outside, the night air was cold enough to sting. I stood by my car for a long moment, looking up at the sky. The clouds had finally parted, and for the first time all week the moon was visible, sharp and silver like a coin tossed into darkness. I left for the airport before sunrise. Seattle was still asleep, its streets slick with rain. I parked my car in long-term parking and walked into the terminal, the ticket clutched like a secret in my hand. The gate agent greeted me with a polite smile. Good morning, Miss West. You're in seat 2 amperes. First class is noted. I blinked. So it's real. Very real, she said, handing me the boarding pass. As I settled into my seat on the plane, I glanced around at the quiet luxury that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Soft leather seats, champagne on offer, before takeoff attendants who spoke in calm, rehearsed tones. I kept expecting someone to tap me on the shoulder and tell me there'd been a mistake, but no one did. When the plane lifted off, Seattle shrank below the clouds, and for the first time in years the knot in my chest loosened. I wasn't running away. I was running towards something. Hours later, when the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers had drifted to sleep, I unfolded the letter again. I traced the line where Grandpa's handwriting met the printed text. Trust, the game he'd written. Trust had never been easy for me, not after years of being dismissed, ignored, overlooked. But maybe he'd known that. Maybe this was his way of forcing me to believe in something again. By the time the flight attendant whispered, "We'll be landing in Zurich in 20 minutes," I was wide awake, my heart thudding like it did before the start of every big exam in college. I looked out the window, and the first light of dawn touched the snow-capped Alps, blinding and pure. The wheels touched down with a soft thud, and an unfamiliar calm spread through me. Zurich was quiet, orderly, beautiful. Everything felt intentional, as if the world itself had paused for this moment. Inside the terminal, the air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh bread. I followed the crowd through customs, still unsure what I was doing, until I saw him. A tall man in a dark suit stood near the arrivals gate, holding a sign with my name in neat black letters, Miss Clara West, Rosenberg Trust. He spotted me immediately, his expression calm but focused. Miss West, he asked in lightly accented English. Yes, I managed. He gave a short, respectful nod. Welcome to Switzerland. Please come with me. We've been expecting you. The words sent a chill down my spine, not fear but recognition. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. Someone, somewhere, was waiting for me. As I followed him through the glass doors into the soft winter light, I caught my reflection in the window. The girl who'd left Seattle humiliated wasn't there anymore. What stared back at me was someone I barely recognized, steady, curious, quietly powerful. And for the first time, I believed my grandfather had known exactly what he was doing. Dinner that night was unbearable. The long oak table gleamed beneath the chandelier, the same one my mother insisted was real crystal imported from Venice. The sound of forks and knives scraped against porcelain, and the air smelled faintly of wine and superiority. My father was talking about some expansion deal at West Maritime, while Victor scrolled through photos of his Manhattan penthouse on his phone. I sat quietly, letting their voices wash over me, counting the minutes until I could leave. So Victor said, suddenly glancing at me with a smirk, "How was your little trip to the bank? Did they tell you how much your paper envelope's worth? I didn't bother looking up." "Not yet." Mom took a sip of her wine, eyes glittering. "Maybe it's a coupon for Swiss chocolate. Or a free museum pass. You've always liked art, haven't you, dear?" Their laughter came easily effortless in its cruelty. Dad gave a half-hearted chuckle before adding, "At least you're getting an adventure out of this. A vacation might do you good before you come back to reality." I smiled politely. Maybe reality's the thing I'm leaving behind. The silence that followed was delicious. Even the chandelier light seemed to flicker. My mother set her glass down, the sound sharp as a warning. "Don't be dramatic, Clara. It's unbecoming." "Maybe," I said, standing up, "but it's honest." Her brow furrowed. "Where are you going for air?" I left them at the table, their whispers chasing me down the hall like ghosts. Outside, the garden lights glowed faintly against the rain. The night smelled of wet earth and roses, and for a moment I just breathed. The humiliation that had haunted me since the will reading had dulled into something else, resolve. When I came back inside, Mom was still at the table pretending to be casual. "Clara, you should know," she began, swirling what was left of her wine. "Your father and I only want what's best for you. You've always been delicate." "Delicate," I repeated. "That's one word for invisible." Her lips thinned. "You're being unfair. Your grandfather spoiled you with those silly games of his. He made you think life was about feelings and clever words instead of money and power. He made me think about moves," I said quietly, "and patience." She sighed dramatically, waving her hand. "You always were his pet project." "Funny," I said. "That's exactly what he said about you once." Her face hardened. I didn't wait for the explosion. I went upstairs, packed the last of my things, and closed the door behind me before the next argument could start. In my old bedroom, the air was stale with the scent of furniture polish and a childhood long gone. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase open beside me. My passport, my letter, my one-way ticket to Zurich. Grandpa's handwriting stared back from the page, "Trust the game." The words pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. Trust meant action. Trust meant movement. And for once I was done standing still. The next morning I left before sunrise. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I paused at the front door, looking back one last time. The walls were lined with family portraits, Dad in his tailored suit, Mom in her pearls, Victor with that smug grin. There were none of me, not one. I smiled. "Perfect," I whispered. The drive to the airport was silent, except for the rain tapping against the windshield. My phone buzzed with a message from Mom. "Don't do anything foolish. Call when you get there." I turned it off. At the check-in counter, the clerk smiled professionally. "Destination Zurich," I said. "Business or pleasure?" I hesitated. "Neither," I said finally. "Closure." The woman blinked, then nodded as if she understood. She handed me my boarding pass and wished me a pleasant flight. Inside the terminal, I watched other travelers hugging loved ones, rolling shiny suitcases, holding coffee cups and passports. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. I envied that certainty, but maybe not for long. When my flight was called, I walked down the jet bridge, my suitcase bumping softly behind me. The cabin smelled faintly of citrus and linen. I found my seat first class again, somehow, and settled in. The woman next to me wore a designer scarf and smiled politely before putting on her headphones. As the plane taxied down the runway, I pressed my hand against the window. Seattle disappeared beneath a layer of fog, and I felt something unclench inside me. Every mile between me and that dining table was a small act of rebellion. Hours later, somewhere above the Atlantic, I opened my notebook. I began writing, not a letter, not a plan, just thoughts. "They think I'm running away," I wrote. "But really, I'm running toward something. Toward him, toward myself." When I landed in Zurich, the world was washed in white. Snow clung to rooftops and treetops, the kind of beauty that demands silence. The air was cold and thin, each breath a reminder that I was far from home. Customs was easy, almost too easy. The officer stamped my passport and handed it back with a polite willkommen. I followed the crowd through the arrivals hall, still trying to decide what came next. Then I saw him. A tall man in a dark overcoat stood near the exit, holding a sign with my name. Miss Clara West, Rosenberg Trust. He looked straight at me as if he'd been waiting his entire life for this exact moment. His expression was professional, but there was something else in his eyes, a kind of quiet certainty. I stopped in front of him. "That's me," I said. He gave a small bow, European and precise. "Miss West, my name is Lucas Meyer. I'm here on behalf of Rosenberg Trust." "Rosenberg Trust," I repeated, as if saying it out loud might make it less surreal. "Yes," he said smoothly. "Your grandfather's arrangements were extensive. He requested that we escort you directly." "Escort me where?" He smiled faintly. "To your grandfather's estate, in Switzerland." "My grandfather didn't have property here." "Not under his name," Lucas said. "Please, Miss West, the car is waiting." For a second I couldn't move. The airport buzzed around us, voices, luggage wheels, flight announcements, but I felt like everything had gone silent. Finally I nodded. "All right." He led me outside into the crisp air. A sleek black Bentley waited at the curb, gleaming under the pale winter Sunday. As Lucas opened the door, he said quietly, "Your grandfather was a remarkable man. It's an honor to fulfill his final wishes." I slid into the back seat, the leather cold against my hands. As the car pulled away, I looked out the window at the snow-covered landscape. The roads wound through small villages with stone houses and wooden shutters, smoke curling from chimneys. Everything was too beautiful, too precise, like stepping into a dream I wasn't sure I deserved. Lucas drove in silence for a while before asking, "Is this your first time in Switzerland?" "Yes," I said softly. "And apparently my first time learning who my grandfather really was." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You'll find he was a man of many surprises." I leaned back against the seat, watching the world pass by in shades of silver and white. The humiliation of the will reading the laughter, the dismissive smiles, all of it felt far away now, like someone else's story. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the family's embarrassment. I was someone worth waiting for. As we turned off the main road onto a winding path, lined with fir trees, Lucas said quietly, "We'll arrive shortly, Miss West." I caught my reflection in the window, calm, steady, unrecognizable. The car slowed before a set of iron gates where an emblem carved in gold read Rosenberg Private Trust. When the gates opened and the car rolled through, a shiver ran through me. Somewhere ahead, behind those towering pines and snow-draped roofs, waited the truth my family had laughed off. Grandpa's final game had just begun. The drive from Zurich to the mountains felt like crossing into another world. The city's neat streets and tram bells gave way to winding roads lined with pine trees heavy with snow. The car's headlights cut through the mist, illuminating glimpses of stone cottages and frozen fields. Lucas drove in silence, his posture straight, his eyes always on the road. I sat in the back, clutching my coat tighter around me, still trying to believe that any of this was real. Outside, Switzerland looked like something out of a painting, too calm, too orderly, too clean to belong to the same universe as my family. When the road began to climb, I leaned forward. "Where exactly are we going, Lucas?" glanced at me in the rearview mirror. To your grandfather's estate near Lake Geneva. The Rosenberg Trust offices are nearby. My grandfather never owned property here, I said automatically. He smiled slightly. Not under his American name, no. The answer sent a shiver through me. The snow grew heavier, swirling against the windshield. Lucas switched on the wipers, and the rhythmic sound filled the car. You'll find, he continued, that your grandfather left behind more than anyone realized. He valued privacy above all things. The words sat between us, heavy and cryptic. Privacy wasn't something Grandpa had ever needed in Seattle. He was open, funny, the kind of man who made conversation with strangers in grocery store lines. The man Lucas described sounded like someone else entirely, a man with secrets. After nearly an hour, the trees parted to reveal a stretch of open land. Through the falling snow, I saw lights glowing in the distance. The outline of a vast stone house emerged, steep roofs, tall windows, and a grand staircase sweeping up to the front entrance. The kind of estate you'd see in old European movies, not in real life. The gates opened soundlessly as we approached. 2 guards nodded as the car rolled through. Lucas glanced back at me. Welcome to Rosenberg Estate, Miss West. The Bentley stopped before the steps. A man in a tailored gray suit stood waiting at the top holding an umbrella. He looked to be in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. Good evening, Miss West, he said in a deep accented voice. I am Franz, the caretaker. It's an honor to finally meet you. Your grandfather spoke of this day. I stepped out of the car and into the snow. The cold bit instantly at my cheeks, but I hardly noticed. He spoke of me many times, Franz said. He made detailed arrangements for your arrival. I followed him up the steps and through the enormous front doors. The warmth inside hit me immediately, along with the smell of cedar and polished stone. The foyer was vast, lined with portraits and candle sconces. A fire crackled in the hearth, throwing shadows across the marble floor. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of wealth and taste: antique rugs, crystal chandeliers, paintings that looked expensive enough to hang in museums. It didn't feel like anything my grandfather would have built. And yet, there was a familiarity in the details: the chessboard carved into the side table, the clock ticking softly in the corner. Franz led me to a sitting room where a tray of tea waited beside the fire. Please, he said, gesturing for me to sit. Mr. Keller will join you shortly. Who's Mr. Keller? The executor of the trust, he said simply. He will explain everything. As Franz left, I sat alone, the fire crackling behind me. My eyes drifted to the mantel where a photograph sat framed in silver. I stood and walked closer. It was Grandpa, smiling younger, standing on a balcony overlooking this very lake. I touched the glass, tracing his face with my fingertip. You were full of secrets, weren't you? I whispered. The door opened behind me. He was a man who valued foresight, a voice said. I turned. A tall man stood there, mid-40s perhaps, with neatly combed hair and eyes the color of steel. His suit was perfectly tailored, but there was nothing ostentatious about him. He carried himself like someone used to control. Miss West, he said, extending his hand. I'm Adrian Keller, Chief Executor of the Rosenberg Trust. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, professional. You've come a long way, he said, motioning for me to sit again. I had questions, I said. I'm sure you do, he replied, and I'll do my best to answer them. He opened a leather folder and slid a document across the table toward me. This is your grandfather's final directive regarding his international holdings. Everything you see here has been held under Rosenberg Trust since 1998. I stared at the rows of numbers and company names. There were properties, shares, offshore accounts, more money than I could imagine. My stomach turned. This can't be right. He wasn't that kind of man. Adrian tilted his head. What kind of man do you believe he was? He was a retired businessman. Comfortable, not this. I gestured helplessly at the document. Mr. West was many things, Adrian said calmly. But above all, he was strategic. He once told me, "The people who see your worth too late are the ones who taught you its value." He wanted you to see what they couldn't. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The fire popped behind us. "Why me?" I asked. "Why not my father or brother?" "Because he trusted only you," Adrian said. "He saw how your family treated you. He saw how they treated him too." "What do you mean?" Adrian hesitated, studying my face. "Some truths are better told when you're ready to hear them. For now, all you need to know is this: your grandfather's holdings have been transferred to your control pending identity verification tomorrow morning in Geneva." The words hit like a physical force. My control? Yes. The Rosenberg Trust has maintained these assets on your behalf for the last 10 years. Mr. West left explicit instructions that they would activate on your 27th birthday. I blinked, disoriented. "That's next month." Adrian smiled faintly. "We're early," he said. "You might need a head start." The clock on the wall chimed softly, pulling me back to the moment. I looked down at the document again, then back at Adrian. "So what am I supposed to do now?" "Rest," he said, "and be prepared to listen carefully tomorrow. The rest of your grandfather's story deserves to be told in full." I followed Franz down a long hallway to the guest room prepared for me. The walls were pale cream, the linens crisp, the window overlooking the dark lake below. I stood there for a long time after he left, watching snow fall in the reflected firelight. On the bedside table sat another envelope, sealed with a wax crest identical to the one on my original letter. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single note written in Grandpa's steady handwriting. "Clara, you're closer than you think. Trust is the hardest currency to earn and the only one worth keeping. The truth waits for those who dare to leave the noise behind." I read it 3 times, my heart hammering. The silence of the estate pressed in around me. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, whispering against the windows. Somewhere far below, I could hear the faint rush of water from the lake. I folded the note carefully and slipped it under my pillow. For the first time since his funeral, I let the tears come quiet, steady not from grief, but from the strange relief of being seen. When the clock in the hallway struck midnight, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. In the stillness, I could almost hear his voice. "The queen moves when the board is silent." Tomorrow, I would find out what game he'd been playing all along. The morning light over Lake Geneva was so pale it looked almost silver. I woke to the sound of soft footsteps outside my door and the faint clink of porcelain. When I opened it, Franz stood there with a breakfast tray, coffee, croissants, fruit. His manner was as precise as the ticking clock in the hall. "Good morning, Miss West," he said with a polite bow. "Mr. Keller requests your presence in the study when you're ready." I nodded, still groggy, and thanked him. When he left, I stood by the window holding the coffee cup between my palms. The lake stretched endlessly below, framed by snow-dusted mountains. It didn't feel like a view that belonged to me, but somehow I was part of it now. Half an hour later, I followed the scent of polished wood and burning fire to the study. Adrian Keller was already there, standing beside the fireplace, a folder open on the desk before him. He looked up when I entered. "Good morning, Miss West," he said. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough," I replied. "I've had stranger dreams." He smiled faintly. "Then let's see if we can make sense of them." He gestured toward the chair across from him. I sat, heart thudding. On the desk lay documents with embossed seals, pages of financial statements, and what looked like property deeds. "This," Adrian began, "is the full portfolio of your grandfather's trust. For 10 years, it has been under my management per his instructions. All assets are legally registered under Rosenberg Trust, an umbrella organization he founded in Switzerland." I frowned. "He was never involved in Swiss business." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "He was more involved than anyone knew. Mr. West established Rosenberg Trust in the late 1992 after certain disagreements with his partners in the United States. He relocated portions of his wealth here to protect them." My mind raced. From what Adrian paused, studying me. From your family. The words settled in the air like dust after a storm. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Your father and his associates at West Maritime had begun using company funds for speculative investments, he continued evenly. When your grandfather confronted them, they attempted to force him out under the pretext of age and declining judgment. He anticipated this long before it happened. So he created something separate, untouchable. I leaned back, the room spinning. You're telling me he built an entirely new fortune in secret? Adrian nodded once. And he used his own lessons in patience to do it. Every year, he expanded investments in shipping, hospitality, and real estate, mostly in Europe and Asia. He worked quietly, always under the Rosenberg name. He refused to draw attention. And now it's mine. It is, Adrian said softly. By his directive, the trust activates under your name once you verify your identity in person. He slid a sleek black folder toward me. Inside, I saw pages stamped with government insignias, company seals, and figures that didn't seem real. My eyes skimmed down the page numbers that stretched into the hundreds of millions, possibly more. This can't be right, I whispered. There must be a mistake. There's no mistake, he said. He began transferring control 8 years ago through holding companies and subsidiaries. Each one is linked to your trust. I looked up, stunned. He did all this without anyone knowing. Adrian's expression softened. He was a man who preferred his victories quiet. The fireplace crackled between us. I stared at the papers, the edges trembling in my hands. I wanted to laugh or cry or both. My grandfather, the man who'd worn old sweaters, who'd driven a 10-year-old pickup truck, had been running an empire beneath everyone's nose. Why me? I asked finally. Why not my father or Victor? Adrian closed the folder and folded his hands on the desk. He said, you were the only one who saw people instead of power. The only one who played the long game. I thought of our chess matches when I was a child, the way he'd lean back after I made a move and say, Patience, Clara. The queen wins by watching. He left something else for you, Adrian said, interrupting my thoughts. He opened a drawer and retrieved a small, ornate box. He asked that I give you this personally after you learned about the trust. My pulse quickened as I opened the box. Inside lay a single gold key and a folded note. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and ink. You once asked why I taught you chess instead of business, the note read. Because both require vision. The difference is that in chess, no one applauds until the end. Trust the silence. It means you're winning. The handwriting was his strong, certain, unmistakable. My throat closed. I looked up at Adrian. What does the key open? He smiled faintly. That, Miss West, you'll discover in time. But I can tell you it's symbolic. There are physical safes, yes, but more importantly, it opens decisions. Freedom. I turned the key over in my palm. It was heavier than it looked. Adrian stood. We should leave for Geneva soon. The bank expects us at 10. The drive back down from the mountains felt different this time. I sat in the front seat beside Lucas, the documents secured in a case at my feet. The snow had slowed to a soft flurry, and sunlight began to break through the clouds. At one point, Lucas spoke quietly. Your grandfather was a good man, stern but kind. He visited often, always asked if the lake was calm. You knew him well, I asked. As well as anyone could, Lucas said. He was private. But he spoke of you. My chest tightened. What did he say that you reminded him of the part of himself he didn't lose? The words stayed with me the entire drive. When we reached Geneva, the city sparkled beneath the morning Sunday. The streets were lined with cafes and glass storefronts reflecting the water. It was all too clean, too beautiful to feel real. The Bentley stopped in front of a white stone building with tall windows and a bronze plaque that read Rosenberg Private Trust. Adrian stepped out first. This is where it begins, Miss West. Inside, the air smelled of leather and paper. The receptionist greeted us in French, then switched effortlessly to English when Adrian introduced me. This way, please. she said, leading us down a quiet corridor to a boardroom overlooking the lake. At the end of the table sat a man in a navy suit. His hair was silver, his features sharp. "Miss West," he said warmly. "I am Mr. Laurent, director of the Rosenberg Trust. We've been waiting for you." Waiting. The word struck something deep in me. He motioned for me to sit, then placed a sleek tablet in front of me. On its screen was the digital form of my grandfather's will, different from the one I'd seen in Seattle. This one was stamped "Confidential, International Holdings. Before you sign, Miss West Laurent said you should know what you're inheriting." He turned the tablet so I could see the list: companies, resorts, shipping lines, real estate portfolios, names I recognized from news headlines. One line at the bottom caught my eye: West Maritime Holdings. Silent partner, Rosenberg Trust, 51% ownership. My breath caught. "He still owned it," I whispered. "All these years he still owned it." Adrian nodded. "Through you now." The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the heater. I stared at the screen, the weight of it all pressing down. For years my family had laughed at me, dismissed me, treated me like a shadow. But here I was, the only one holding the truth they'd buried. Mr. Laurent placed a pen beside me. "Sign here, Miss West. Once you do, the trust is yours." My hand hovered above the line for a moment, trembling, then steadied. I signed. The tablet chimed softly, confirming the transfer. Mr. Laurent smiled. "Congratulations, Miss West. As of this moment, you are the sole beneficiary of Rosenberg Trust. Your grandfather's legacy continues through you." Outside, bells from the nearby cathedral began to ring. I looked out at the glittering lake and whispered under my breath, "Checkmate, Grandpa." For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like victory. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling through the sheer curtains of the Geneva hotel suite. The city outside was quiet, the streets gleaming from a night of soft rain. My mind was still buzzing from yesterday, from the signatures, the words "sole beneficiary," and the realization that my life had been split cleanly in two. There was before, when I was the overlooked granddaughter, and after, when I held an empire in my hands. A soft knock at the door pulled me back to the present. When I opened it, Adrian stood there, immaculate as ever, holding 2 coffees. "You didn't answer your phone," he said, stepping inside. I assumed caffeine would be more persuasive. I took the cup, grateful. "I barely slept," I admitted. "It feels unreal." "It should," he said, taking a seat across from me. "You've inherited more than wealth, Clara. You've inherited control. That's a rare thing." I sat opposite him, staring out the window at the distant mountains. "Control," I repeated. "That's not something my family ever thought I had." "Then they'll be in for a surprise," he said. We drank in silence for a few minutes. The sound of church bells floated through the air. Finally, Adrian set down his cup. "There's something you should see before you return home," he said. "A file your grandfather left sealed until your signature was verified. It contains the detailed records of his U.S. holdings, including one I think will interest you." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were several documents marked "Confidential, West Maritime Group." I froze. "He still owned it," Adrian said quietly, "through shell subsidiaries and holding companies, 51% to be exact. Your father never knew." My stomach dropped. "That means that you're now the majority shareholder of the family company he finished for me." I sank back into my chair, speechless. West Maritime, my father's pride, my family's legacy, was mine. Grandpa had hidden control of it behind a labyrinth of corporate names, waiting for me to inherit it when the time was right. "He planned this for years," Adrian continued. "He wanted you to understand what real power looks like. Quiet, deliberate, patient." The words echoed through me. I thought of the chessboard from my childhood, the missing pawn, the way Grandpa had smiled when I learned to sacrifice small pieces for greater wins. I closed the folder and looked up. "I'm going home." Adrian nodded. "I thought you might say that." The flight back to Seattle felt shorter somehow. The air in the cabin was thick with anticipation. When the plane descended through the clouds, I caught sight of the city's gray skyline, the one I'd left behind in humiliation. Now it looked different, smaller, like a place that had once tried to contain me and failed. At baggage claim, the familiarity hit me in waves. The chatter, the fluorescent lights, the smell of coffee, my old life waiting to be confronted. Outside, a driver held a sign with my name. I smiled. Even that felt strange now. He opened the door to a black sedan and handed me an envelope. From Mr. Keller, he said. Inside was a single note. Remember, silence is strategy. Speak only when the move matters. I tucked the note away and watched the rain blur the city as we drove. That evening, I went back to my apartment for the last time. The space was just as I'd left it, small, cluttered, unremarkable. I walked through each room, slowly touching the furniture, the photos, the chipped coffee mug by the sink. It already felt like a museum of a life that no longer belonged to me. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and stared at the updated balance. More zeros than I'd ever imagined, power in its quietest form. Then I looked at the folder marked West Maritime Financials. I opened it. Line after line of figures glowed on the screen: shipping routes, profit margins, contracts, debts. The company wasn't thriving. Despite my father's bravado, it was drowning in debt and mismanagement. I felt a slow, cold satisfaction. The next morning, I called my father's office. His secretary sounded startled when she heard my name. "Hold, please," she stammered. A click. Then his voice, brisk, tired, but unmistakable. "Clara, this is unexpected. I'd like to see you," I said. "It's important." A pause. "What about business?" That word alone was enough to silence him for 3 long seconds. "Come by the house," he said finally. When I arrived that evening, the house looked the same: gleaming marble floors, sterile air, expensive art that said nothing about love. Mom opened the door, surprise flickering across her face. "Clara, we weren't expecting you." "I won't stay long," I said. They were in the living room, wine glasses in hand as always. Dad stood when I entered. "You look different," he said, studying me. "Europe suits you." "Switzerland," I corrected. "And yes, it does." He smiled thinly. "Did you find what you were looking for more than that?" I placed the folder on the coffee table between us. The leather gleamed under the light. "I came to return something that belongs to the family. Or maybe to show you who it belongs to now." He frowned. "What is this?" "Financial statements," I said. "West Maritimes. I think you'll want to look at the ownership records." He opened the folder, scanning the documents. His face paled as he read. This isn't possible." Mom leaned forward. "Howard, what is it?" He looked up slowly, disbelief clouding his features. "Rosenberg Trust owns 51% of West Maritime." "Not anymore," I said softly. "It's mine now." The silence that followed was absolute. Mom's eyes widened. "What are you talking about? Grandpa never gave up the company. He just hid it. And when he died, it all came to me." Dad's voice broke. "That's absurd. He left everything to me in his will. In the American will, yes. But there was another one in Switzerland." He sank into the chair, staring at the pages, as if they might rewrite themselves. "He didn't trust me," he whispered. "Would you have after what you did?" I asked. His head snapped up. "What I did, you and Mom tried to push him out. He saw it coming. He built something stronger, something you couldn't touch." The color drained from Mom's face. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" I said, pulling out the letter Adrian had given me. "He saw everything. He forgave you, but he didn't forget." For the first time in my life, neither of them had anything to say. I stood, slipping my coat back on. "The company will continue. I'm keeping everyone employed. I'll run it the way he would have wanted." Dad looked up, his expression hollow. "You're taking everything from me." "No," I said quietly. "I'm taking back what was his." As I walked toward the door, Mom's voice followed, trembling with anger and something else, fear. "Clara, this isn't over." I turned back, meeting her gaze. It already is. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet pavement and cedar. I took a deep breath, lifting my face to the cold night sky. For years, they'd made me feel small, invisible, powerless. But now the game had changed. And this time, I was the one making the moves. The letter was waiting on my desk when I returned to the penthouse that evening. Cream-colored paper, the same thick stock my grandfather always used, and sealed with that familiar wax crest. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a single line written in his slanted script. "There's more to see, Clara. Look deeper." For a long time, I just sat there staring at it. I'd already seen enough to fill a lifetime trust documents, ownership records, a web of companies stretching across continents. But something in those 4 words wouldn't let me rest. Look deeper. The next morning I called Adrian. He left another message, I said. He didn't sound surprised. "Then it's time you learned the full story." By noon I was back at Rosenberg Estate, the snow melting in thin silver streams down the stone steps. Franz met me at the door and led me to the study where Adrian was waiting. He stood by the fire, a thick, leather-bound folder in his hands. "This," he said, placing it gently on the desk, "is your grandfather's private correspondence. Letters, memos, personal notes. He wanted them delivered to you once you assumed control of the trust." I hesitated before sitting down. "What am I going to find in there?" "The truth," he said simply. "But not an easy one." I opened the folder. The first few pages were business letters, polite and formal, discussing market conditions and mergers. Then the tone shifted. The handwriting changed, less measured, more urgent. "They've begun moving assets without my approval. Evelyn says it's temporary, but Howard signed the papers himself." My breath caught. "They're rewriting the company's bylaws to push me out. Victor witnessed it. He's just a boy, but already he knows how to play their game." I looked up at Adrian. He knew. All this time he knew they were trying to take everything. He nodded. He didn't just know. He planned for it. I kept reading. The next letter was addressed to A.K. Adrian Keller. "If you're reading this, then the board has forced my hand. Let them believe they've won. Let them build their empire of arrogance. When the time comes, transfer Rosenberg Trust to Clara. She is the only one who understands that strength is quiet and patience is louder than pride." The words blurred as my eyes filled. I pressed a hand to my mouth. Adrian's voice was soft. He built the second empire after they cut him out. Everything Rosenberg holds was created in silence with his own hands. "But why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. "Why didn't he warn me? Because he wanted you to see them for who they were first," Adrian said. "He needed you to know the cost of trust before you inherited it." I turned another page, and there it was, an old photo yellowed around the edges. Grandpa standing on the dock beside my father, both in hard hats, both smiling at the same ship that now belonged to me. On the back in faint ink he'd written, "He was my greatest pride and my deepest disappointment." I closed my eyes. When I spoke again, my voice was steady. "What happened to him in the end?" Adrian hesitated. "He fell ill 2 years before his death, but he refused treatment. Said he'd lived his life on his own terms. He spent his last year mostly here, managing his affairs from this estate. He knew the end was near, and he wanted everything in order for you." I traced my fingers over the edges of the photo. "He died thinking his son had stolen everything from him. He died knowing his granddaughter would take it back," Adrian said. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of snow and pine. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice again, the calm certainty in his tone when we played chess. "Patience, Clara. Watch the board. Let them move first. Is there anything else?" I asked. Adrian hesitated, then pulled another envelope from the folder. "There's one more letter. He wrote it the week before he passed." I unfolded it carefully. "My dearest Clara, you will learn that power and goodness are not enemies, though people will tell you otherwise. Your father and mother confused greed with ambition, pride with purpose. You must never make the same mistake. Do not waste your strength on revenge. Use it to restore what is right. The world will call that justice, but I call it love. By the time I finished reading, tears were running silently down my cheeks. I didn't bother to wipe them away. I think I understand now, I said quietly. He didn't want me to destroy them. He wanted me to rebuild what they ruined. Adrian nodded. And perhaps to rebuild yourself in the process. That evening, I walked down to the frozen edge of the lake. The air was sharp, biting against my skin, but I didn't care. The estate lights reflected on the water, fractured by ripples. Somewhere beneath that surface, I imagined the woman I'd been just weeks ago, the one who believed she was invisible, small, unwanted. I see you now, I whispered to the reflection. I finally see you. Behind me, I heard the crunch of footsteps. Adrian had followed me, his breath clouding in the cold. You know what you have to do, he said. Yes, I said. Go home, he smiled faintly. And what then? I looked back at the lake, at the faint line where the water met the sky. They took everything from him. But he didn't want me to punish them. He wanted me to show them what real strength looks like. I'll give them that chance. Adrian studied me for a moment, then nodded. He chose well. We walked back to the house in silence. Inside, the fire had burned low, and the clock in the hall struck midnight. In my room, I packed slowly, folding the letter and tucking it into my bag. The gold key rested beside it, heavy and warm against my palm. As I zipped the suitcase, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who'd left Seattle. There was something sharper in her eyes, now calm, measured, unafraid. I turned off the lights and opened the window. The air that rushed in was cold, almost metallic, but it cleared my mind. Tomorrow, I murmured. Tomorrow they'll see. When dawn broke, the first light touched the lake like fire. The car waited at the gate, its engine humming softly. Adrian stood by the driver's side, his gloved hands folded neatly in front of him. Are you ready? He asked as I approached. More than ever. He handed me a small envelope before I stepped inside. From him he said, on the front, in that same familiar handwriting, were the words, to be opened when you reach home. As the car pulled away, I watched the estate fade into the mist. My reflection in the window overlapped with the rising Sunday, the Queen finally in motion. The road ahead wound downward, curving through the forest and into the valley below. The snow glowed gold in the early light, and for the first time since the will reading, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't just my grandfather's heir anymore. I was his final move. When the plane touched down in Seattle, the city was shrouded in mist, the kind that blurred the skyline into soft gray shapes. I watched it through the oval window as the wheels hit the runway, my hand still resting on the envelope Adrian had given me. The words written on it seemed to pulse faintly under the cabin light, to be opened when you reach home. Home. I wasn't sure what that word meant anymore. The air outside was cold, wet, and heavy, with the smell of pine and rain. I pulled my coat tighter around me as I stepped into the terminal. Everything felt the same, crowded, noisy, impatient, but I wasn't. I wasn't the teacher scraping by anymore, or the daughter who sat quietly while her family dismissed her. I was someone else now. Someone who held the strings they didn't even know existed. I opened the envelope as soon as I got to my car. Inside was a short note in my grandfather's handwriting. Clara, the truth is never an ending, it's an invitation. What you do with it determines what kind of person you become. Do not let anger write your story. Make your move, but make it count. Underneath the note was a single keycard with the Rosenberg crest engraved in gold. I turned it over. On the back, it read Suite 47 West Tower. I knew exactly where that was. By the time I reached downtown, the rain had stopped. The West Tower loomed over the city, glass gleaming against the dull sky. It was the kind of building that whispered power, a mix of corporate confidence and old money polish. My father had always dreamed of leasing an office there for West Maritime, but it had been far beyond the company's reach. I smiled at the irony as I handed the keycard to the security guard. He scanned it and nodded respectfully. "Good morning, Miss West. The suite has been prepared for you." When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped into a world that looked nothing like the one I'd left behind. The suite was spacious and modern, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. A single folder sat on the glass desk. Inside were documents bearing my name and title, Clara West, Principal Shareholder, West Maritime Group. I let out a slow breath. The transformation was complete. The company that had been my father's obsession was now under my control. That evening, I went back to my apartment one last time. The place looked smaller than I remembered. I packed a few things, a stack of books, an old photo of Grandpa and me at the pier, the chess set with the missing pawn. When the movers came the next morning, I gave them the new address, Westfield Estate. By afternoon, I stood in the grand foyer of my new home, surrounded by silence and the echo of my own footsteps. The house smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. Through the wide windows, I could see the city stretched out below like a living map. For a moment, I let myself breathe it in the stillness, the distance from everything I'd known. Then I called my father. He answered on the third ring, his voice clipped. "Clara." "Dad," I said evenly, "we need to talk." "I don't think there's much left to say," he muttered. "There is," I said. "I'm making you an offer." Silent. I could almost hear the disbelief on the other end. "An offer? I'm not here to humiliate you, Dad. I'm offering to keep you on as executive manager. You'll run the day-to-day operations at West Maritime. The company stays intact. The employees keep their jobs. Nothing changes except who signs the checks." He laughed softly, the sound edged with bitterness. "You want me to work for you?" "I want you to work for the company Grandpa built," I said. "The one you almost destroyed." Another silence, longer this time. Finally, he said, "You really are his granddaughter. That's the idea." I ended the call before he could respond. That night, I stood by the balcony overlooking the city lights. The rain had cleared, leaving the streets slick and glistening. Below, people hurried under umbrellas, unaware that entire empires shifted quietly above their heads. My phone buzzed, Mom's name flashing on the screen. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, a message. "We're hosting dinner Sunday. Be there." It's time we talked. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings. Adrian coordinated the transfer of management authority, lawyers adjusted contracts, and financial analysts briefed me on market projections. I listened carefully, signing documents with a steadiness that surprised even me. By Friday, my name appeared in the company registry beside a title that once belonged to my father, owner and majority shareholder. On Sunday evening, I drove to my parents' house. The same marble floors, the same art, the same forced smiles. But the energy had shifted. This time when I walked in, their laughter stopped first. Mom opened the door with her usual polished grace. "Well," she said, her tone sharp with curiosity, "the prodigal daughter returns." "Something like that," I said, taking off my coat. Victor was there too, lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up briefly and gave a smirk. "Heard you've been playing businesswoman. How's that going?" "Better than expected," I said. "How's unemployment?" His smirk faltered. Dad appeared from the dining room, his expression unreadable. "Let's eat," he said. Dinner was a quiet war. Silverware clinked. The smell of roasted garlic filled the air. Every word was measured, every glance sharp. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice soft but deliberate. "Clara, whatever this is, this power trip, it has to stop. You can't possibly think running West Maritime will end well." "I don't think," I said calmly. "I know," Victor scoffed. "You think you're some kind of CEO now?" "I don't think it," I said again. "It's printed on my business card." Dad slammed his fork down. "Enough. This family has been through hell because of that company. Your grandfather's paranoia destroyed everything. Don't repeat his mistakes." I looked straight at him. "His mistake was trusting you." The room went still. Mom's voice rose sharp with outrage. "How dare you speak to your father like that? How dare you laugh at him when he left me that envelope?" I shot back. "How dare you assume I was nothing while he was still protecting every one of you?" They said nothing. For once they had no words. I stood pushing my chair back. Dinner's over. I didn't come here for approval. I came to tell you something. I looked directly at my father. You're still on the payroll, but from now on you answer to me. He stared at me for a long time, his face pale, his pride stripped away. Finally, he nodded once. Then I'll see you at work. I left the table before anyone could respond. The house behind me felt smaller than ever. Outside, the air was cool and still. The city lights shimmered beyond the hills, and the first drops of rain began to fall again, soft and steady. I tilted my face upward, letting them hit my skin. This wasn't the ending Grandpa had imagined. It was the beginning of something else. They had tried to erase him. I would make sure his name and mine were written where no one could ever touch them again. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a message from Adrian. Congratulations, Miss West. The board has accepted your leadership transition. I smiled into the dark. The Queen was finally on the board, and it was my move now. 3 days after the dinner, I sat in my new office on the top floor of the West Tower, staring at the skyline through the glass. Seattle was gray and quiet, the kind of morning that made sound feel distant. Papers were spread across my desk, financial reports, legal summaries, ownership confirmations. I'd spent the last 48 hours reading every detail about West Maritime. And the deeper I went, the clearer one truth became: the company was drowning. The debt was suffocating. Cash flow barely existed. Contracts had been mishandled, budgets ignored. My father's leadership had been a facade, polished smiles covering cracks in the foundation. Every number on the page confirmed what I already knew. If I didn't move fast, the company would collapse within 6 months. The intercom beeped. Mr. Keller on line 1, my assistant said. I pressed the button. Put him through. Adrian's voice came warm and steady. You've seen the numbers, I assume I have, I said, flipping through the binder again. It's worse than I expected. That's why your grandfather positioned the trust to intervene. He anticipated this kind of mismanagement. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. The board doesn't know yet. But they'll find out soon enough. They're expecting a savior, not the daughter they all underestimated. Then let's make sure you play the part, Adrian said. Discretion first. Let them think the offer came from a foreign investment group. Alpine Holdings has already been registered in Zurich under your trust. So the buyer of West Maritime is you, he finished. But no one needs to know that. It'll appear as an international acquisition, a lifeline for the company. The plan clicked into place, sharp and perfect. Make the offer, I said. Already in motion, Adrian replied. 45 million, all cash. Above market value, clean contract, no red flags. They'll take it. I hung up, my pulse steady but quick. For years they'd laughed at my envelope. Now I was buying back everything they'd stolen. By noon, I was at the office headquarters of West Maritime. The lobby still smelled like salt and coffee, the same scent I remembered from childhood visits. Employees greeted me politely, not realizing the new owner had just walked through their doors. My father's assistant led me upstairs, her heels clicking on the polished floor. He was in the boardroom, papers scattered, sleeves rolled up, tension in every movement. When he saw me, surprise flickered across his face. Clara, I didn't expect you here today. I wanted to see the operation, I said calmly. Understand what I'm responsible for. He laughed once, dry and nervous. Responsible? You mean what I'm responsible for? Of course, I said, forcing a smile. For now. He didn't catch the edge in my tone, or pretended not to. That afternoon, Adrian's team sent over the official acquisition proposal. I watched from my apartment as the document was delivered by courier to the board of directors. Everything was executed exactly as planned, anonymous, professional, legitimate. The perfect trap. The next morning, my father called. His voice was tight. Clara, something happened. I let a hint of concern color my tone. What is it? We received a buyout offer. Out of nowhere. A Swiss investment group, Alpine Holdings. They're offering far above valuation. I paused as if thinking. Is that good news? I don't know yet, he admitted. The offer is generous, almost suspiciously so, but the terms are solid. They want full control, no changes to staff or leadership for 3 years. That sounds ideal, I said lightly. Maybe you should take it. He laughed, but it came out hollow. You think I should sell the company. I think you should consider what's best for everyone, I replied. Sometimes letting go is a smarter move than holding on. He hesitated, then sighed. You sound just like him. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, I said, and hung up. By Thursday, the board had convened. My father paced the length of the conference room, arguing with Victor and the other directors. They debated valuation, foreign influence, potential mergers. None of them knew that the investor they were discussing was the same woman who had once fetched them coffee during family meetings. Friday at 4:47 p.m., the deal was signed. West Maritime was sold to Alpine Holdings. At 5:15, the wire cleared. By 5:30, I owned the company. When the confirmation email came through, I read it twice. Transaction complete. That was it, no fanfare, no applause. Just a quiet click of the universe falling into place. That night, Adrian called. Congratulations, Miss West. The acquisition went smoothly. Your father has no idea who's behind it. I stared out the window at the city lights. He will eventually. Maybe, Adrian said. But by then, the company will be thriving again, and it'll be too late to take it back. I smiled faintly. Checkmate, I whispered. 2 days later, Dad invited the family to dinner. He sounded almost giddy on the phone. We should celebrate, he said. New beginnings. At the restaurant, they were all there, Mom in her pearls, Victor bragging about his latest car purchase. My father raised his glass. To Alpine Holdings, he announced proudly. To the deal that saved our company. Everyone cheered. Everyone but me. I just lifted my glass and murmured to new owners. He didn't notice. The meal went on like a play I'd seen too many times. Mom chatted about vacation plans. Victor about investments, all of them oblivious to the irony. They were celebrating being rescued by the same person they'd laughed at. After dessert, I excused myself, claiming I had an early meeting. Outside, the night air was cool and damp. I walked to the edge of the street, looking back through the restaurant's glass walls. My family laughed over wine, their reflections blurred by the rain. For a fleeting moment, I almost pitied them. Almost. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. Adrian had already sent a progress report, restructuring timelines, staffing plans, new management appointments, all under my authority. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my father. You should be proud of me, Clara. We finally made the right move. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Yes, we did. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror buttoning a charcoal gray blazer. The reflection that stared back was sharp, composed, deliberate. For the first time in years, I saw him in me. Grandpa's calm, his patience, his quiet resolve. Downstairs, a courier waited with a fresh set of documents from Rosenberg Trust. The heading read Ownership Transfer. West Maritime Group subsidiary Rosenberg Global Holdings. I signed the last page and closed the folder. My hands were steady. By the time I reached the office later that day, the air buzzed with rumors. The acquisition had made headlines. Foreign investment group Alpine Holdings buys majority stake in West Maritime. My father was pacing the lobby, talking to reporters, playing the part of the visionary leader who had saved his company. He didn't see me walk past. I rode the elevator to the top floor where my new office awaited. The plaque on the door still bore his name, but not for long. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and looked out at the harbor below, the ships moving like pieces on a giant chessboard. My chessboard now. Grandpa's voice echoed in my mind, steady as always. A good player doesn't announce victory. She just keeps moving. I smiled, picked up the phone, and called Adrian. Let's start phase 2, I said. Already in motion, he replied. I hung up leaning against the glass, watching the city breathe below me. Seattle had never looked so small. The Queen was no longer in hiding. She was on the board, and it was her game now. I hadn't planned to invite them. Not yet. But some moments feel too right to resist. The power was already mine. The truth was simply waiting for its audience. So I sent the message on Thursday morning, short, polite, impossible to ignore. Dinner at my new home. Friday, 7 o'clock. Mom called within the hour. "Your new home?" she asked, suspicion dripping from every syllable. "Where exactly is that? You'll see," I said, and ended the call. Friday night arrived with a storm, the kind that rattled windows and turned the sky into a restless gray sea. I stood at the top of the stone staircase, watching headlights crawl through the rain toward the gates of Westfield Estate. The staff moved quietly behind me, lighting candles, pouring wine, adjusting place settings on the long oak table. Everything gleamed. Everything was ready. When the doors opened, the wind swept in first, then my family. Mom wrapped in her cashmere coat, her perfume thick enough to compete with the rain. Dad followed, his expression cautious, the unease of a man used to being in charge but suddenly unsure of the rules. Victor trailed behind them, smirking as if the whole evening were a joke. Mom stopped halfway into the foyer, eyes darting across the marble floors, the chandeliers, the portrait of grandfather that hung above the fireplace. "This is quite something," she said. "Whose place is it?" "Mine," I answered. Her head snapped toward me. "Yours?" I smiled. "Yes. I bought it 2 weeks ago." Victor laughed, shaking his head. "Right. With what teacher's salary?" "With interest," I said simply. No one spoke after that. We sat for dinner, the storm crackling outside as thunder rolled over the hills. The table glittered with silverware, crystal glasses, and candlelight. Franz, the estate's caretaker, served quietly, moving like part of the shadows. Mom tried first. "Well, darling, you've certainly done something with yourself. You must tell us your secret." "A rich boyfriend. A sudden lottery win." "Something like that," I said. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's not turn this into an interrogation. It's good to see everyone together." "Of course," Mom said sweetly, though her eyes never left me. "I just think it's fascinating that Clara managed all this so quickly." Her tone was sugar over glass. I set my fork down carefully. "Some things take time. You just don't see them until they're finished." Victor leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "What's this really about, Clara? You drag us here to show off your little castle," I smiled. "Not exactly." Dad frowned. "Then, what is it about?" I reached under the table, lifted a leather folder, and placed it between us. "You should probably read this." Dad hesitated, then opened it. His eyes moved across the pages, confusion melting into disbelief. "This can't be right." Mom leaned over. "What is it?" He didn't answer. His jaw tightened. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Alpine Holdings. The buyout. You." I met his eyes. Yes, me. The sound of the storm filled the silence that followed. Mom's hand froze halfway to her wineglass. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I bought West Maritime. The company, the contracts, the ships, everything." Victor laughed sharply, incredulous. "You're lying." "You think so?" I reached for the folder, flipped to the final page, and slid it toward him. "The signatures are all there. Ask your father whose name he signed under." Dad looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. "You manipulated us." "No," I said evenly. "I offered a fair price. You accepted. That's business." Mom slammed her hand on the table, her voice breaking. "You tricked your own family." I stood, slowly, my chair sliding back with a soft scrape. "No, Mother. I learned from mine." The thunder outside cracked like a gavel. "You made fun of me at Grandpa's will reading," I continued, my voice calm but sharp. "You laughed when all I got was an envelope. You said he didn't love me. You were wrong." Mom rose, too trembling with fury. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I said quietly. "It just makes me honest." Victor shoved his chair back, standing beside her. You can't just take everything and call it justice. I looked at him unflinching. I didn't take anything. I simply claimed what was already mine. Dad's voice cracked low and broken. That company was my life, Clara. You had no right. I turned toward him. And what right did you have to destroy it, to betray him? The words hit him like a blow. His face went pale. How did you? I read his letters, I said. All of them. He saw what you did, how you tried to cut him out. He forgave you, but he never forgot. Mom's breath caught audibly. She sank back into her chair, eyes glassy. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the fire hissing in the hearth and the rain against the windows. Finally, I said, I didn't invite you here to gloat. I invited you because I wanted you to see what he built, what he protected, and what you almost lost. You thought he left me nothing, but he left me everything that mattered. Dad sat down slowly, staring at his hands. So, what now? He asked. You run the company and we what applaud? No, I said softly, you rest. You stop pretending you were the victim. You stop treating me like a mistake. He lifted his gaze to mine. There was no anger left, only exhaustion. He said you were different, he murmured. I see it now. Mom looked up, her voice trembling. Clara, whatever this is, this revenge, it won't make you happy. I met her eyes. Maybe not, but it makes things right. I gathered the folder and turned to leave. At the doorway, I stopped and looked back at them one last time. You always said I wasn't strong enough for business. You were right. I'm stronger. When the door closed behind me, the sound echoed through the hall like thunder. I walked down the long corridor toward the great staircase, my footsteps steady. Outside, the storm had eased into a light drizzle. The air smelled of rain and wood smoke. I stood on the porch, breathing in the cold, the silence, the sense of something ending. Behind me, through the tall windows, I could see them still seated, frozen in disbelief. For years, they'd made me small. Tonight, they saw me as I was. Inside my pocket, the gold key warmed against my fingers. Grandpa's last lesson pulsed through my mind. Power doesn't shout, Clara. It whispers and the world listens. The rain began again, soft and rhythmic. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the gates, my heels sinking slightly into the wet gravel. By the time I reached the car, I felt lighter. Not triumphant, not angry, just whole. As Franz opened the door for me, I looked back at the house one last time. The lights glowed through the mist, soft and golden. They know now, I said quietly. Franz nodded. Yes, Miss West, they do. The engine started, and as the car rolled down the long driveway, I whispered to the night, the game's over. But deep down I knew it wasn't really over. It had only changed shape. The board was mine now, and every move from here would define what kind of queen I would become. The morning after the dinner, I woke to a silence that felt heavier than any storm. The air inside the estate was still the kind that holds its breath after something irreversible. I made coffee and stood by the window watching fog drift over the hills, swallowing the city below. My phone was already vibrating with missed calls, Dad, Mom, even Victor. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I called Adrian. It's done, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. How did they take it? As expected, I said. Shock first, then anger, then silence. Silence, he murmured. That's when people start to understand. I'm not sure they ever will, I said softly. They spent years believing I was the weakest one. I don't think they know how to see me any other way. They will, Adrian said. In time. But I wasn't sure time could fix what had been broken. Later that morning, I went to the office. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, the hum of machinery echoing in the small space. When the doors opened, I found the staff unusually quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, eyes followed me, and whispers trailed in my wake. They all knew something had shifted. The energy was different now. In the boardroom, my father was waiting. He stood by the window, shoulders stiff, a cup of untouched coffee in his hand. You didn't have to humiliate us like that, he said without turning around. I didn't humiliate you, I replied evenly. I told you the truth. He turned then, his face pale and drawn. You think that makes you righteous? You bought your own father's company. Do you have any idea what that feels like? I met his eyes. I know what it feels like to be laughed at in a lawyer's office while everyone else divided the empire and I was left with an envelope. So yes, I think I do. He flinched, but didn't argue. For the first time, I saw the man behind the pride, the one who'd spent his life trying to fill a shadow he never could escape. I made mistakes, he said quietly. Your grandfather and we didn't agree on much, but I never wanted this. Neither did I said. But he left me the choice. I just made it. He nodded slowly, staring down at the cup in his hand. So what now? You stay on, I said. For now, the employees trust you. But there will be changes, structural, operational, ethical. We're rebuilding. He gave a humorless laugh. Rebuilding what? The legacy he wanted, I said. His eyes softened just slightly. You really think you can fix this? I know I can. That night, I received a message from Victor. We need to talk, not at the house, please. We met at a small cafe near the waterfront, one of those places that smelled like salt and burnt espresso. He was already there when I arrived, slouched in a corner booth, fidgeting with his phone. Nice place, I said, sitting down. He smirked. I wasn't sure you still did normal things like coffee. I do when there's a reason. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Look, I was angry, okay, but I didn't know Grandpa left you all that. None of us did. You didn't care to know, I said. He sighed. You're right. We treated you badly. Mom, Dad, me, we all did. But I want to make things right. Why? I asked, studying his face. Because you mean it, or because you think I can help you? Now he hesitated. Both. At least he was honest. I don't need your apology, I said finally. But I'll give you a chance to prove it. West Maritime is expanding. We're opening a logistics division. You'll start at the bottom. His eyes widened. You're offering me a job, I'm offering you a clean slate, I said. What you do with it is up to you. He nodded slowly as if trying to decide whether to feel grateful or insulted. Fine, he said. Mailroom janitor, whatever, I'll take it. For the first time in years, I almost smiled at him. We'll see. When I got home that evening, the estate was glowing in the golden light of sunset. The storm had passed completely, leaving the air fresh and cold. Franz greeted me at the door with an envelope. Delivered by courier, he said. From Zurich. Inside was a short note from Adrian. The trust is now fully under your control. There are no more conditions. You are free to decide what kind of legacy you wish to leave. For a long time I just stood there reading the line again and again. Free. It felt strange, heavy, and light all at once. I walked to the terrace and looked out over the valley. The city lights blinked like stars below, and in the reflection of the glass door I saw my own face, older, somehow sharper but steady. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. Do not waste your strength on revenge. Use it to restore what is right. Maybe that's what this was all leading to, not destruction but restoration. The next morning I went back to the office early. The building was quiet, the corridors empty. In the boardroom, sunlight streamed through the windows, hitting the table like fire. I spread out the plans I'd been working on, employee equity programs, green shipping initiatives, new partnerships. It wasn't just about profit anymore. It was about purpose. By noon, Dad arrived. He looked tired but calmer than the day before. He studied the papers, then looked at me. You're serious about all this? Completely. He nodded. Then you'll need my help, whether you like it or not. I know, I said. And I do. For a moment, something like mutual respect passed between us. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was close enough to start. That evening, as I drove back to the estate, the first snow of winter began to fall. The city glowed beneath it, soft silver, alive. I thought about everything that had happened, the laughter at the wheel, reading the trip to Switzerland, the moment I realized I'd been underestimated my entire life. I thought about Grandpa's last letter, about his faith in me. and for the first time I believed I'd earned it. When I reached home, I walked through the grand hall and paused at his portrait. The eyes in the painting seemed to follow me, steady and knowing. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I didn't let them destroy what you built." The fire crackled in the hearth. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed 8. I stood there for a long moment, letting the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the house sink into me. Then I turned toward the staircase. There was still more to do, more to build. But for the first time, I wasn't running from the past. I was walking toward the future, my future, one I'd built from ashes, with patient strategy and something stronger than revenge. As I climbed the stairs, snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the city in white. By morning, everything would look new again. A year later, I stood on the balcony of my office, watching ships move through the bay like pieces on a slow, deliberate chessboard. The skyline shimmered under a pale spring sun, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely steady, no longer defined by what I'd lost or by what I had to prove. The company was thriving. The trust was secure. My family, though fractured, was finding its rhythm again. Dad still came to work every day, though now he knocked before entering my office. He'd accepted his new position with quiet grace, focusing on the logistics department where he belonged. The anger had faded from his eyes, replaced by something humbler, heavier. Sometimes, when we walked the shipping yards together, he'd look out at the cargo lines and whisper, "Your grandfather would have been proud." I didn't always answer, but I knew he was right. Mom had softened too. After months of tension, she'd stopped pretending the past hadn't happened. One afternoon, she called, her voice trembling, and simply said, "I'm sorry for everything I said that day in the lawyer's office. I see now what I couldn't see then." I didn't interrupt her. I just listened. Forgiveness didn't come instantly, but when I finally said, "I know, Mom," it felt like breathing after holding my breath for years. Victor surprisingly kept his promise. He started in the mailroom like I said. The first few weeks, the staff whispered about the CEO's brother sorting packages and running errands, but he didn't quit. 6 months later, he'd earned a promotion. Now he was in operations management, working longer hours than he ever had in his life. Sometimes when I saw him walking through the office in his wrinkled shirt, clipboard in hand, I saw a flicker of who he might have been all along if our family hadn't been built on pride. At home, the estate had changed too. The silence that once felt like isolation now felt like peace. The halls weren't haunted anymore. They were filled with new beginnings. On weekends, I hosted dinners for the employees who had stood by me through the transition, people who worked behind the scenes, the ones no one ever noticed. We ate, laughed, and toasted to the future. That future had grown larger than even I expected. The new division, Rosenberg Global Logistics, had become one of the fastest-growing operations on the West Coast. Our environmental initiative to modernize shipping fuel systems was being featured in international journals. Reporters no longer introduced me as the granddaughter of the late industrial magnate. Now I was simply Clara West, CEO and philanthropist. I'd even launched a foundation in Grandpa's name, the Rosenberg Foundation for Ethical Leadership. Its first project funded scholarships for underprivileged students in maritime engineering. Every time I signed one of those letters of acceptance, I felt something heal inside me. It was as if I were giving someone else what Grandpa had once given me, a chance to be seen. One morning, Adrian called from Zurich. "You've done more than he imagined," he said. "He'd be proud." "Thank you," I said. "But I think he'd tell me to keep going." Adrian laughed softly. He always did love a challenge. We talked for an hour about upcoming ventures, and when the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at the letter framed on my desk, the one Grandpa had written the week before he died. "Use it to restore what is right." I traced the words with my fingers, feeling how they had shaped everything I'd become. That evening, the family gathered at the estate for dinner. It was the first time in over a year we'd all sat at the same table without tension. The fire glowed, the wine flowed, and laughter came easier than I thought it ever would again. Dad raised his glass. To Clara, he said, his voice steady. For reminding us what legacy really means. I smiled, shaking my head. To family, I said. The real kind, the one you build when you finally stop pretending everything's perfect. They clinked glasses. Even Mom smiled. After dinner, I stepped outside. The night was clear, the stars reflecting on the lake like pieces of light scattered across the water. I could still remember that girl sitting in a lawyer's office, humiliated and small, clutching an envelope everyone thought was empty. I wished I could tell her what I knew now, that the envelope hadn't been a consolation prize. It had been an invitation to transformation. The breeze carried the faint scent of cedar and rain. I thought of Grandpa again, of his voice during those long chess games when I was a child. Patience, Clara. Let them underestimate you. It's how you win without cruelty. He was right. Winning hadn't been about revenge. It had been about becoming someone who no longer needed it. I turned back toward the house. Through the windows I could see my family laughing, Mom leaning toward Dad, Victor making a joke that actually made her laugh. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time, it felt like we were all seeing each other clearly, without envy, without fear. The next morning, I took the company jet to San Francisco for a board meeting. As we flew over the mountains, the clouds parted, revealing stretches of snow and sunlight that looked endless. I closed my eyes and thought about how far I'd come from a forgotten granddaughter to the architect of a legacy built on integrity and renewal. At the meeting, reporters were waiting outside the headquarters. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and one voice called out, "Miss West, do you believe your family's redemption story has influenced your leadership style?" I paused before answering. "I believe redemption is leadership," I said. "When you rebuild something broken with grace instead of bitterness, you lead by example." That's what my grandfather taught me. The sound of shutters clicking followed me as I walked inside, but I didn't look back. By evening, I was back home, sitting by the fireplace with a glass of wine. The firelight flickered against the chessboard on the table beside me. It was still missing the pawn, just like the one Grandpa and I used to play with. I'd left it that way intentionally. A reminder that every game begins with sacrifice. I reached for my phone and opened the Notes app, typing a few lines for the Foundation's website. We are the sum of our choices, some born from pain, others from patience. But the moment we choose to build instead of burn, we become the architects of our own peace. As I hit save, my phone buzzed with a message from Adrian. "Are you content, Clara?" I looked at the flickering fire, at the life I'd built from the ashes of doubt and betrayal, and typed back. Content isn't the word. Fulfilled, maybe. Finally. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the pines around the estate. Somewhere in that sound, I thought I heard his voice again, calm and certain. "You played the long game well, my dear." I smiled. "Game over, Grandpa," I whispered. "But the legacy's just begun." Then, turning to the audience that had followed me through every storm, I said softly into the quiet of the night, "If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been underestimated or overlooked, remember this. What's inside your envelope might just change everything. Like, comment, and share your story. Someone out there needs to know that it's never too late to make your next move." And with that, I closed the chapter, not with vengeance, but with victory that finally felt like peace.